And as I made clear to President Trump in our call last week, I will reject all attempts to weaken Canada, all attempts to wear us down, to break us down, so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
That was the message from Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, delivered not with hesitation, but with surgical precision, as Washington circles August 1st on the calendar, preparing to unleash a 35% tariff on Canadian steel, aluminum, and key industrial components. In the face of this aggressive economic threat, Carney didn't flinch. He didn't compromise. Instead, he drew a line in the sand. "We will not be bullied into submission," he declared in Parliament, triggering a wave of political support, economic debate, and international curiosity. This isn't just another tariff dispute. This is a full-blown sovereignty crisis, one that could redefine the rules of North American trade for decades to come. And at the heart of it is a standoff between two longtime allies now locked in a game of economic brinkmanship. On one side, the United States, emboldened by protectionist rhetoric and domestic political pressure, threatening punitive measures unless Canada folds into a lopsided trade deal. On the other, Canada, digging in with a new prime minister, an assertive agenda, and a refusal to trade dignity for dollars. What's unfolding isn't just policy, it's principle. Carney's refusal to bend marks a pivotal shift from accommodation to confrontation, one that signals Canada's intent to forge a new economic path, less reliant on Washington, more open to global diversification, and firmly grounded in national self-determination. This video unpacks everything: the stakes, the strategy, the shockwaves. Why Canada said no. What happens next? And why, in Carney's words, no deal is better than a bad deal. Mark Carney's rejection of the proposed U.S. trade deal wasn't a snap decision. It was a calculated move rooted in months of rising tension between Ottawa and Washington. The United States, under pressure from domestic manufacturers and political hawks, has been inching toward a protectionist stance for over a year. The final blow came when the U.S. Trade Representative's office announced its intent to impose a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian steel, aluminum, and industrial inputs, materials that are not only vital to Canada's economy, but also deeply embedded in the cross-border manufacturing ecosystems of Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. For Canada, this wasn't merely about numbers, it was about national identity. Accepting the deal would mean tying the country's industrial future to a framework designed in Washington, on Washington's terms. It would grant the U.S. leverage to dictate terms of Canadian resource extraction, limit exports, and interfere in regulatory autonomy. In Carney's own words, this was less a deal and more a set of instructions. That's not partnership. That's coercion. Inside Parliament, the mood was charged. Canadian lawmakers from across party lines rallied behind Carney's stance. The proposed U.S. deal included clauses that would have curbed Canadian subsidies, placed monitoring conditions on rare earth exports, and introduced aggressive dispute resolution measures favoring American corporations. The optics were clear. Either Canada played along or paid the price. Instead of folding, Carney stood his ground. But his resistance wasn't just rhetorical. It was strategic. Just days before the U.S. tariffs were set to take effect, Canada unveiled a sweeping internal economic agenda anchored by a legislative bombshell, Bill C-5. This bill, rushed through preliminary readings and expected to pass with bipartisan support, lays out a comprehensive framework for economic self-reliance. It targets infrastructure bottlenecks, accelerates domestic industrial capacity, and injects billions into high-tech manufacturing zones across Ontario and Alberta. The objective? Create a supply chain so resilient and so diversified that U.S. pressure becomes irrelevant. Carney's approach goes beyond just resisting American demands. It's about changing the very foundation of how Canada trades. His administration has launched a coordinated effort to diversify export routes, deepen ties with Europe, and fast-track agreements with Indo-Pacific partners. At the heart of this push is a $12 billion expansion of the Port of Vancouver, aimed at rerouting supply chains toward Asia, and a new Atlantic logistics hub in Nova Scotia to strengthen ties with the EU. And Canada is already seeing early signs of success. Since the U.S. announced its tariff intentions, over a dozen countries have reached out to Ottawa, expressing interest in deeper trade ties. Japan, Germany, and India are among those reportedly in talks for expedited trade facilitation frameworks. This flurry of diplomatic and commercial activity signals a key turning point. Countries are viewing Canada not as an appendage of the U.S., but is a sovereign economic actor worth engaging independently. Still, the risks remain enormous. The U.S. remains Canada's largest trading partner, accounting for over 70% of its exports. A sudden breakdown in trade could devastate key sectors like auto manufacturing, mining, and aerospace. But Carney's gamble is that long-term sovereignty is worth short-term pain. It's a high-stakes chess game, and every move is being watched not just in Washington, but in Berlin, Beijing, and beyond. At home, public opinion is divided. Some Canadians are nervous. Others are energized. A recent poll by the Angus Reid Institute shows that while 58% of Canadians support Carney's refusal to sign the U.S. deal, nearly 40% worry about immediate economic fallout. Job losses, price hikes, and export delays are very real concerns. Yet Carney's messaging has been relentless. We will not mortgage the future to avoid discomfort in the present. Canada will not be a junior partner in its own economy. His words echo louder than ever because this conflict has come to represent something far greater than steel and tariffs. It's about sovereignty, about refusing to be boxed in, about declaring once and for all that Canada will no longer be bent to fit the mold of its larger neighbor. It's an assertion of independence, wrapped in economic logic and delivered with diplomatic force. That's what makes this moment historic. Canada is not simply rejecting a deal, it's rejecting a dynamic. For decades, it has operated under the assumption that proximity equals dependency. Carney is shattering that premise. And in doing so, he's resetting the terms of how the world engages with Canada. But with high principle comes high risk. The next section will explore just how volatile this path could become, examining the political backlash, the global fallout, and the three possible futures that now hang in the balance. As the standoff between Canada and the United States intensifies, the situation is now entering uncharted territory. What began as a tactical refusal has snowballed into a continental crisis, one that could spiral into a full-scale trade war if not carefully managed. Yet Carney appears unmoved. His message has remained consistent: sovereignty first, concession second, if ever. But Washington isn't backing down either. In response to Canada's defiance, U.S. lawmakers have begun floating secondary tariffs targeting Canadian agricultural goods, rare earth exports, and even digital services. Internal memos leaked from the U.S. Department of Commerce suggest a retaliatory package that could hit over $22 billion worth of Canadian exports. American steel lobbyists, emboldened by election season politics, are pressuring for immediate enforcement to discipline Canadian trade behavior. In short, the pressure is escalating from diplomatic posturing to full-blown economic punishment. And this is exactly the escalation Carney anticipated. His administration has preemptively activated a crisis mitigation framework under Bill C-5. Emergency subsidies for key export industries are being deployed. Temporary tax reliefs have been announced for small manufacturers who rely heavily on U.S. imports. Moreover, Canada is in high-level negotiations with Mexico, South Korea, and Brazil to fast-track mutual trade deals to cushion any sudden disruptions. But even as Canada weathers the first economic blows, it's the political messaging that's proving even more disruptive to Washington's usual playbook. Carney is reframing the narrative, not as a trade disagreement, but as a sovereignty siege. His rhetorical shift has begun to resonate well beyond Canadian borders. Editorial boards across Europe have picked up the story. French newspapers are praising Canada's quiet resistance. In Berlin, Carney is being referred to as the economist who roared. In India, the government has sent a delegation to Ottawa to explore an energy-sharing framework that bypasses the U.S. entirely. This wave of international interest points to something larger: potential rebalancing of global trade alignments. Canada, long seen as the U.S.'s quieter neighbor, is now emerging as a standalone economic force, one that dares to challenge Washington's dominance. And global powers are noticing. The World Bank recently upgraded Canada's resilience score, citing independent economic governance as a major factor. Meanwhile, U.S. allies in the Pacific, like Australia and New Zealand, are reportedly reconsidering their own trade dependencies in light of Canada's bold stance. But it's not just global attention Canada is attracting, it's global investment. Foreign direct investment inflows have seen a surprise 11% spike in Q2 alone, according to preliminary data from Statistics Canada. Infrastructure, energy, and digital services are the hot sectors. Investors are betting that Canada's pivot away from the U.S. won't just be temporary, it'll be transformational. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. What comes next? At this stage, analysts see three possible scenarios unfolding, each with very different consequences for both countries and the broader global economy. Scenario 1. Full-blown trade war. This is the worst-case scenario and also the most emotionally charged. If both nations continue down this retaliatory path, we could witness a complete breakdown in bilateral trade. Cross-border auto manufacturing grinds to a halt. Agricultural exports rot at ports. Supply chains collapse, and a recessionary wave hits both economies. Under this outcome, the damage would be mutual, but politically, Carney could emerge stronger domestically for standing his ground. In contrast, the U.S. could face blowback from border states whose economies are deeply entangled with Canadian trade. Scenario 2. Temporary truce. This is the moderate outcome and arguably the most likely in the short term. Both sides agree to freeze additional tariffs and enter renegotiations. The U.S. may dial back some demands to save face, while Canada maintains key red lines. Under this scenario, the damage is contained and diplomatic ties remain intact. But trust will be fractured and future cooperation would proceed with caution. This path offers political stability, but little resolution to the deeper issues of imbalance and power asymmetry. Scenario 3. Strategic compromise. In this more optimistic vision, the crisis becomes a catalyst for genuine reform in the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. Both sides acknowledge the need for fairer terms. Canada retains sovereignty over industrial policy, while the U.S. gains guarantees on security and standards. This scenario would require extraordinary diplomatic finesse and perhaps a new U.S. administration more open to multilateralism. But if achieved, it could lead to a more equitable and stable economic partnership going forward. Of course, these scenarios aren't static, they're fluid, evolving with each new policy, each statement, each market reaction. Carney's government is playing for the long game, building alliances, shoring up industry, and preparing the public for the storm. It's a bet on resilience over convenience, on strategy over submission. And here lies the uncomfortable truth for Washington. Carney is changing the rules. Canada isn't just pushing back, it's pushing forward, crafting a new model for small to medium powers seeking independence in a world of economic giants. If this model works, other nations may follow, creating ripple effects that could unsettle U.S. leverage on a global scale. In many ways, this moment is bigger than Canada. It's a test of whether a nation can assert its autonomy without paying the ultimate price. And so far, the answer is a maybe. The final chapter of this story is yet to be written. But one thing is certain, Carney's gamble has already altered the trajectory. What began as a rejection of a bad deal is now a referendum on economic sovereignty in the 21st century. So here we are, at the edge of a seismic shift in North American trade relations. What Mark Carney has done is not just reject a lopsided deal, but redefine what it means to stand firm in an era of economic intimidation. Canada's message is clear. National dignity isn't negotiable. From emergency legislation to international alliances, from ports in Vancouver to diplomatic talks in Berlin, Ottawa is laying the foundation for a new sovereign path forward, one that prioritizes resilience over reliance. But the question now isn't just what Carney will do next. It's what the world will learn from this moment. Can a country truly say no to a superpower and come out stronger? Or will the cost of that defiance prove too high to bear? This is more than just policy. It's history in motion. And it's far from over. If you found this analysis compelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the stories reshaping our world. And if you want to understand how this trade standoff could trigger a collapse in 6 key U.S. states, make sure to watch the next video that's now appearing on your screen. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay critical, and we'll see you in the next one.